Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
There's a little change in the schedule today, just changing the orders. Lucas, due to visa issues, he cannot be here today, but he's going to do his presentation on Skype. We tested and then keep our fingers crossed that should go just fine, I think. How's everybody doing? Yeah? So one of my dear colleagues at Microsoft Research hosts the annual location summit, and I love to participate in that one. He always starts his sessions with a joke, and just to get everybody started. I see that we have a good diversity of culture and geographical regions and disciplines, research disciplines. So I figured we can do some lost in translation kind of jokes. And so but I don't have all the jokes. I can do one, and then hopefully you guys will help me. So like after break, somebody should volunteer tell a joke. I'll tell mine and see if I can make you laugh. I have a lot of things with my talking partners. I have an English-Chinese talking pair partner. So she teaches me English words, and I teach her Chinese. I had a partner like this many years ago, and now my 12-year-old daughter is my talking partner. Anyway, so one of the things is that in the very beginning, and I was teaching my talking pair partner about Chinese, not only language, but also culture kind of things. So she asked me, so how exactly do you use chopsticks? And so I wanted to show her how to hold chopstick and how to pick up things. But there's no food on the table yet, so I used the chopstick and I pick up the spoon. She said, oh my gosh, that's a hard way to use spoon. So next time is your turn. Let's get started. And so Lucas, I think I'm going to just switch to you.
Okay, sounds good.
Let me bring up the Skype. And if you could show your screen, then we can get started.
Microsoft Research Cambridge have been developing, but the kind of the thrust of that talk was just going to be about 60 minutes of kind of in-depth demoing of tools that we've been building. And as you can see with the technology issues we've already had, I don't think it would be too helpful to try and do any hardcore software demoing on this line. So instead, I'm going to give a little bit more of a general talk, which I'm calling Building an Environmental Prediction Engine at Microsoft Research. And you can't get away from addressing the new tools for environmental science that we've been building along the way. But just to start, because most of you probably aren't all that familiar with our group or the fact that we even exist, given that we're on a completely different continent at the moment, I just kind of wanted to give you a brief rundown of who we are, what we are, and why we do what we do. And so who we are, there is a group at Microsoft Research, Cambridge, UK, called the Computational Science Lab. And the kind of overarching grand aim of the Computational Science group here in Cambridge is to make, enable, and accelerate transformational advances in science in areas of societal importance. And so that was really put together by a guy named Stephen Emmett, which none of these pictures are all that great on my screen, so I'm assuming they're probably 10 times worse on your screen, but he'd be the guy. Okay, great. And I should say, if anybody has any questions, I don't think I can probably hear you, but I can hear Yana perfectly, so please just stop me. And so that kind of overall aim of the group was put together by Stephen Emmett when he kicked things off. And under his leadership, the group's grown in two parallel but separate directions, one in biological computation and the other in computational ecology and environmental sciences, the group in which I sit. And when you look at the computational science lab in general, it surprises even me to look at some of these numbers because
I often don't think we're as big as we actually are. We have about 50 people in total. We have 7 principal researchers or investigators. Those are the people that you're actually looking at on that slide. I'm the kind of crazy-looking guy with looking slightly to the side in the computational ecology group with the leaves behind me. But we also have these numbers are changing almost all the time, but we have 12 postdocs, 6 software engineers, and a huge kind of revolving cast of PhD students, interns, contractors, et cetera, et cetera. And really, I mean, we all are active scientists doing what scientists do. We do basic and applied research, we publish papers, we give talks. Not all that different from what your traditional kind of academic scientists might do. And in the computational ecology and environmental sciences group in particular, we have even more kind of focused aim, which is to develop the new concepts, methods, and software tools needed to produce, and this is actually important, why it's in italics, to produce useful and predictive models of ecological systems. Looking at things, for example, like climate change and food security. And the reason that we say predictive models of ecological systems is because with very few exceptions, ecology to date hasn't really been able to make very useful predictions. And so we are kind of aiming to try and change that by developing kind of a new kind of computational ecology to underlie a more rational approach to managing the world's ecosystems. So here's kind of a snapshot of some of the people in the computational ecology group. Again, there's 3 PIs, 6 postdocs, half of which are shared with an organization called the World Conservation Monitoring Center, which is the environmental data reporting arm of the United Nations Environmental Program. We've got 3 software engineers and a bunch of, again, PhD students and interns. But what I often get whenever I tell people about what I do and the group that exists here at Microsoft Research, you always get the question of why. And often people mean that in a couple different ways, and so I'm going to address it here briefly in 2 different ways. First, the question of why at all. And I think instead of trying to explain to you, which I'm sure you all know just as well as I do, a lot of the arguments of environmental problems that the world is experiencing, I actually kind of wanted to show a video that I think explains a little bit about where we are, the group's philosophy about predictive ecology, et cetera, et cetera. And it really can be kind of encapsulated by what you see on this slide here, where the world is kind of experiencing, at least in my mind, a crisis of confidence. We're really interested in the environmental side of that crisis of confidence, but really it's behind a lot of the global financial issues that we're experiencing, et cetera, where people thought that they could make predictions and that those predictions would carry them forward into time. They thought that if they bought a house, its value would just keep increasing into the future, off into the distance. They thought that if they made investments, that would happen. They thought if they just kept throwing trash away, that the landfills would just keep appearing to take their trash. And then all of that kind of disappeared, and their investments didn't work, and their house value wasn't increasing, it was decreasing, and suddenly that's where this crisis of confidence came about. People suddenly started thinking that, maybe everything that we thought was true wasn't, and it's making us kind of go back to basics and ask, well, just what can we predict, and with how much confidence? And so to kind of explain where I'm coming from an environmental standpoint on this, I just wanted to show a quick video from a scientist named Chris Bishop, who's actually a Microsoft partner. He's a senior scientist here in Microsoft Research. I think he's the only scientist in Europe with that title. And he was invited in 2008 to give the Royal Society Christmas lectures here in the UK. And the Christmas lectures are actually a pretty big deal. They're shown on prime time over 6 nights over the Christmas holiday season. They're primarily targeted towards school-age kids to try and get them excited about science in general. Chris was asked to talk about computer science in particular, so there is cameos from Bill Gates, et cetera, et cetera. But this is just one kind of clip where he's talking about predictions and certainty and laws of physics. And so in front of I don't know if the clip I have will actually, there you go. In front of a rather large auditorium of school children, Chris is explaining, if he takes this ball and performs a rather death-defying stunt with it, he's actually willing to put himself in that situation because some of the laws of physics that he thinks he understands. And so, if you haven't taken elementary physics or science, this might seem surprising to you, but like for these girls here, but for most of us, it's probably the outcome of this experiment probably is already preordained. So he pulls this back to his head, right, and he says, assuming the world operates the way I think it operates, I'm going to let go of this ball, and it's not going to kill me. Even with Chris's kind of belief structure, you could tell he was still a little bit nervous there. But the point about this is that we do this every day. We don't pull bowling balls back to our heads and let them go, but we drive cars, we work in skyscrapers, things that engineers have built according to standard laws of physics, and we trust them because they make pretty accurate predictions about what's going to happen in time plus one. But the worrying thing is that we also do this every day with the environment. And I think most of you, if you're kind of honest with yourself, probably wouldn't be as confident as Chris was with that bowling ball if that was what we know about Earth systems today. Those things are significantly less predictable, but we're experimenting with them all the time. Deforestation, ocean acidification, CO2 emissions, species extinctions. And really, when you think about it, while Chris's experiment was kind of a nice demonstration of the laws of physics, what we're doing with the environment is pretty much the world's worst experiment. We're experimenting on ourselves, basically. We're the only control. There's no replicates. And so whatever the experimental outcome is, we'll get to decide and find out about sometime into the future. And the thing about Chris's example is he didn't die, right? Because laws and experiments have combined over time to provide very high and predictive certainty about what that bowling ball was going to do as it came back to his face. But we're not even close to that kind of thing for the environment. So we still want to know, for example, where basic things, where will carbon be in the future? Where and when can I plant my crops? What's the climate going to be like? What will actually happen if a species goes extinct? And so because of that, the Computational Ecology and Environmental Sciences group here in Cambridge, I think we all strongly share the belief that science, and especially environmental science, is really set to be the driver of our times. And so that's kind of why we do what we do, why we're trying to build an environmental prediction engine. But the next probably more pertinent question is, well, why at Microsoft, right? That's not a goal that isn't shared by other people outside of the corporate world, for example, in academics and in government agencies. But why are we doing this at Microsoft? Well, I think you really can't deny the fact that as people, at least from a personal perspective, but also as a company, we really do care about doing the right thing. And in particular, doing the right thing actually means doing some science, because a lot of the things that we want to know about environmental systems simply aren't known at the moment. And so we've actually got to get in there. We've got to do some new science. And we've got to solve some of these problems. And some of these problems are massive. And I think one of the reasons that we're doing this at Microsoft is because some of these problems are so big that they really do require a company of proportional size to tackle. And the one thing that you can't say about Microsoft is that it's a small company. So, I think by Microsoft throwing its weight behind this, it's acknowledging the enormity of the situation and putting confidence in its ability to provide some strong steps forward on this problem. And there's also another reason that at least we in the computational ecology group have for doing what we do at Microsoft, and that's because we really do and truly believe that information about the Earth is going to be more important than simply providing information about people is today. Things like social networking sites and advertising revenues on search engines. And the reason that I'm so confident that it's going to be is because it already is. When you look at data on natural resources, things like extractive industries of logging, mining, and oil extraction, those industries overwhelmingly swamp the sectors that companies like Microsoft traditionally focus on at the moment. And so, obviously, as kind of one of the world's largest technology companies, I would say that ignoring this market sector would be extremely ill-advised. And in particular, I think there's huge scope for software that provides predictions for business policy and society, and for software that actually enables the science that we're going to be needing to do into the future. And the thing is, Microsoft actually is a software company, and so that's a pretty head-on argument there. And increasingly, Microsoft really understands the power of predictions. So it might come as a surprise. It came as a surprise to me when I first applied to this job that Microsoft was trying to lead the way in building environmental solutions. But it more and more shouldn't come as a surprise that Microsoft is interested in predictions and the power of predictions. So Bing, Microsoft's what you might call Microsoft's search engine, what Microsoft would used to rather have you call it, is a decision engine. And now I can't remember what is the official new logo for Bing. It's Bing is for doing. Right? And so it's not just for searching. What they're trying to say is this is about decisions. And when you talk about decisions, those things require a prediction about what's actually going to happen. And so a great example of that is Bing Travel, which is a really big success story for Microsoft. It's one of the reasons that people leave Google for their searches. It's to go and do travel searches with Bing. And that's because they provide a service with very high accuracy on predicting whether a flight price is going to go up or down, and they're willing to make bets on that by telling you to buy now or wait. And those are simply predictions that allow you to make decisions, and people are really interested in that. When you think about Kinect, which is the computer vision hardware and software that goes to Xbox 360, allowing for controller-free gameplay, purportedly the fastest-selling hardware device in the history of the world, what that is doing is all about predictions. It's modeling what your hands look like and what your arms look like and what your head looks like, and it's trying to predict what that's going to do into the near instantaneous future. Microsoft Ad Center being run by things like Infer.net, these are all, again, about making predictions for consumers and clients and trying to help them make better and more accurate decisions. And so in the computational ecology group, we're following that model of thinking very strongly. We are firmly committed, I think, to trying to take a crack at building the world's first environmental prediction engine. I don't know if it's an appropriate analogy or not, but the one I always like to use is you kind of think of it as a Bloomberg terminal for the environment, but it says ++ there, because I don't know if you know what Bloomberg terminal is, but it's what most financial analysts and traders are using to continuously in real-time monitor stock markets and provide some analytical solutions on top of those real-time streaming data. And so what we're envisioning here in the group and actually working towards is building a system that allows access to relevant environmental data information, but also providing predictions and decision support tools on top of those predictions anywhere on Earth and at any resolution. And what this does is it's integrating software, data, models, and predictions all as a service on the cloud for anyone, anywhere. And that really does follow Microsoft's kind of commitment to providing software as a service across its entire kind of business model. So I'll be by far the first to admit, everybody in the computational ecology group will be the first to admit that this probably sounds kind of absolutely crazy. It probably is. But we're giving it a go because we think that on the off chance that we get it right, the payoff will be appropriate. And the nice thing about it actually is that I see it at least as a win-win situation. That's because if we succeed at doing this, we're going to do good by the world, and we're actually going to help Microsoft lead the way in providing software services for the world's pressing problems. I think that's a great kind of win-win thing for Microsoft to be involved in. But the best part is if we fail, there's two nice things about, well, still nice things, I guess, about failing. And the first is that we're still going to advance some really important areas of environmental sciences. This is just a snapshot, kind of a word cloud, but not a fully comprehensive one, of all of the bits of environmental sciences that our scientists are actually working towards and contributing towards. So we publish papers. I think last year our group published something like 80 peer-reviewed papers in a lot of the top scientific journals: Science, PNAS, Ecology Letters, on all of these sorts of issues. And so, at the end of the day, trying to build this environmental prediction engine requires us to do new and interesting science, and that's really important because we'll still have done that even if we failed. I'm just going to go through three really kind of quick snapshots of some of the science, some of the larger bits of the science that we're doing that kind of incorporate a lot of the stuff on that previous slide. The first is Global Terrestrial Carbon Model, where we're really just trying to provide a much more open, transparent, and workable solution to estimating the world's carbon stocks and flows. So I'm not sure how many of you have seen or are familiar with this graph. I don't know what side you're looking at it on, but the one under science, it says current predictions. And what it's showing on the y-axis over time on the x-axis is carbon uptake from the global terrestrial land surface. And as you can see, as you move on the x-axis away from the year we're currently in, these models, which each kind of squiggly line on that graph are showing, these models start to diverge very, very, very widely. And so what that's saying is that, these are almost basically useless predictions, because from one model extreme to the other, we're saying, the world is taking up tons of carbon, it's releasing tons of carbon, and so basically we're making predictions, but they're not that useful. And so one of the problems with this is each of those models isn't really assessing any sort of uncertainty amongst its model components. And so those bits of uncertainty, we can't then go in and start to ask, well, why is that blue line so much higher than the black line? That requires a lot of time, a lot of times because these models are extremely complex and computationally intensive, and it takes forever to run them. But also simply because there just isn't uncertainty estimation built into the model process in the first place. And so over the last 2 years, we, and in particular a scientist named Matthew Smith, have really put our heads down and taken a step forward in trying to build the first global terrestrial carbon model where every component bit has parameters that are actually fit to data and have resulting uncertainty about them. That uncertainty is appropriately passed across the model framework so that we're able to actually provide uncertainty about carbon fluxes anywhere in the world. And what's nice about that is it moves beyond just a scientific exercise at that moment, because suddenly you can start building applications like I'm showing a screenshot of on the right where it says Carbon Future Service, where we can actually start mapping out places across the world, how much carbon they have, how much carbon they should have, start matching that up with things like the trading price of carbon futures and the Chicago Carbon Exchange, and you can actually start to make these predictive decision support tools for people in science and beyond. Another modeling effort that we're moving forward with is what is called the Mattingly Model, which is named the Mattingly Model mainly because it's been developed in a building on Mattingly Road in Cambridge. But it's really what we're trying to make the first global ecosystem model, which for the first time combines marine and terrestrial processes in a single integrated framework. it takes a kind of individual-based modeling approach and a bit of a functional type approach and a few other things. So we've got, for the marine, we've got autotrophs with plants and phytoplankton. We've got heterotrophs with carnivores, herbivores, omnivores, zooplankton, and planktivores. And then all of these functional types in their respective environments are running around doing things that the animals do and that we think about from an ecological process point of view, right? They're metabolizing, they're eating, they're dying, they're reproducing, they're going extinct, they're dispersing from one spatial location to another. And we can model all of that by fitting this overall kind of the model components of this overall model to bits of data that we're able to actually collect. We can pass that uncertainty around as well. And eventually what you can do is you can make maps, again, like the one that you see on the upper right here, where we're actually, for any point on terrestrial and marine surface here, we're just showing terrestrial, you can actually ask questions about, oh, what's the biomass of large herbivores in this system. You can look at that over time. You can start perturbing it then with various scenarios and decision planning frameworks. And so what we're showing down here in the bottom bit with this orange and blue is something called the Global Living Planet Functional Index, where people have been looking at functional traits of species over time and looking at species extinction and coming up with an index of how those functional traits are changing globally over time. But the problem is when you're doing that, all you're basically doing is documenting processes in real time, and there's nothing predictive about that. And so what's nice is, this is just me doing some ad hocery in PowerPoint a couple minutes ago, but you can start what this Mattingly model will allow us to do is start putting things like this dashed black line on graphs like this, so we can move ecosystem models more towards the framework of global climate models, where we're making predictions into the future. And that's really important for upcoming international frameworks like the International Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, which is just starting up and is aiming to be a IPCC like framework for looking at changes in biodiversity and ecosystem services over time. And finally, we're working kind of a lot. I head up the conservation research unit within the group, and I'm really interested in looking at how we scale from small to large scales. How do you go from a global to a regional to a local to a very specific place to optimize conservation objectives, priorities, and impact, actually? And so I spend a lot of my time thinking about how do you actually estimate what the true impact of an intervention like a protected area might actually be, and how do you estimate what types of biodiversity might actually be in that protected area. And so, you really are starting to stray down into the Donald Rumsfeld world of unknown unknowns, but you can start to build tools like I'm just showing a screenshot of here that will allow people to start having a much stronger grasp on the decision support frameworks they might be able to use when they're thinking about implementing conservation actions on the ground and integrating those into much larger regional and national frameworks. And finally, the other nice thing about moving towards this environmental prediction engine is that if we fail, we're still going to have created some, what we think to be, at least, useful tools for science and for Microsoft. Because a lot of the science that we're doing, we need new tools to do. We need new tools to allow other people to do the science that we're doing. And so some of the tools that we've been building are part of an integrated component process. For example, for global ecosystem modeling or global carbon modeling, it requires a lot of the component pieces that I'll show here in just a second. But some of them are just kind of one-off things that we think are important and solve a bit of problematic bits of analysis for scientists in general. And so this was actually all of that I've been talking about for the past while was not actually going to be part of my speech. I was going to kind of kick off from here, which is actually the tools that our group has been developing along the way on this journey towards a prediction engine, but I don't really have the confidence in my ability to do convincing demos on the fly from a couple thousand miles away. So what you're going to see are some screenshots, and what you'll hear from me is a very strong encouragement to visit this website up above. Most of these tools that I'll be talking about are found on our website. They're live. They have examples. Many of them, like Fetch Climate and Filsbach, which I'll talk about in just a second, are Silverlight moving to HTML5 online applications that you don't even have to download. You can run from the browser. They provide kind of standard services. Others are traditional Microsoft download and install things. And you'll see there's biology tools on here as well as ecology tools. I'm just going to focus on the ecology stuff, but if you're at all interested in the biology, please get in touch with us as well, or check out the website. So the first tool that I want to talk about is something called Filsbach. I'm just going to stop here, and this isn't anything against Microsoft, but if you're wondering why all of our tools have kind of crazy names, it's because it's almost impossible to actually name anything after anything when you work for a large technology company, because you're dealing with all sorts of trademarks and copyrights and whatever. So usually what's safe is to name a tool after a place, and I think Filsbach got its name from a workshop that its creator, Drew Purvis, actually led in a town called Filsbach. So if you're wondering why it's called Filsbach, that's why. But really all it is a .NET library, but also a Silverlight-based browser application that allows you to fit complex models to heterogeneous data. It sounds pretty boring until you're the person that actually has to start doing this. And when somebody says they want you to do a likelihood-based Bayesian analysis, and you start looking at your options, especially if you're looking at doing it in any sort of .NET framework, it becomes extremely, extremely difficult. And so basically what this is a robust and extremely fast way of doing Bayesian and likelihood-based parameter estimation. And you can actually do it on the cloud now as well. So that's it. There's a web sampler that you can actually go, and it teaches you how to write likelihood statements, how to set up kind of traditional ecological models, some standard biological models, and it provides some decent visual output as well to let you know just how well the model's been fit. Another tool that we have as a browser-based application is something called Fetch Climate, and I think at some point today, if you want to, I think the Research Connections people there will have a link to a video that Drew Purvis did as part of the kickoff keynote lecture with Rick Rashid for TechFest this year at Microsoft, where he demonstrated an application that we've put together called Fetch Climate. And basically, Fetch Climate simply allows you to retrieve global environmental data with a click of a button or a few lines of code. And so you can go to this application online, and you can query standard things like air temperature near surface, precipitation over time. It goes back about 60 years. It goes up to this year. You can vary the sampling resolution, so you can get this environmental data at any resolution anywhere in the world over pretty much any time period. And you can just simply view it. You can download it as a CSV file. What's really nice about it is it provides estimates of uncertainty about those data, because, of course, we don't actually have weather data for all of these places. And so what it's doing is it's finding the appropriate weather stations where real weather data have been taken, and it's running some fairly intensive interpolations between those points to provide a best estimate of what that parameter that you're looking for actually is in that place, but it'll also give you some uncertainty about that, and so you can start to build that into your modeling process. You can also actually include it, though, as part of any kind of .NET code that you're building. And again, these are tools that we've had to build, and they seem kind of basic and easy, but at the end of the day, they do solve a lot of problems. Anytime somebody wants you to build a geospatial application with environmental data in it, for example, you basically have to go back and reinvent the wheel. Now we have an application so that none of us have to reinvent at least this wheel again. The visualizations that you've been seeing on a lot of those on those first few applications that I've been showing are all part of a .NET library called Dynamic Data Display. And the closest that you actually, which is itself just a .NET library allowing you to do dynamic visualization of data and parameters in any .NET functions that you're writing. But this is a standalone version of Dynamic Dataset or Dynamic Data Display, which is the Dataset Viewer. And really all it is an easy visualization of scientific data. So you can take NetCDF files, text files, Excel files, etc., etc. You can simply drag them, drop them. You can cut your data by different ways. You can filter it. You can slide it. You can immediately put your data on maps. You can look at maps over time. You can zoom, and you can actually export those settings and share as well. And again, that's you can find that on our website. There's something called Network 3D, which is probably our most successful tool to date, but that might also be because it's the oldest. It was built by a scientist named Rich Williams, who actually started the computational ecology group here in Cambridge. Unfortunately, he's no longer at Microsoft. But it's a simple and extremely easy to use software application that lets you visualize networks, flip them, rotate them, look at paths of influence. And it's been used extensively. It's been used in Microsoft to actually look at code dependencies when people are pushing out software updates, for example. The U.S. State Department is starting to look at it to understand their kind of paths of influence in their global networks. There's a really good TED Talk, if you're aware of TED Talks, by a colleague of ours named Eric Berlow, who uses Network 3D to actually break down the actors of influence in the Afghanistan war conflict and draw some basic and pretty simplistic insights based on just taking a network approach to looking at this. This is actually a image of a study that I use Network 3D to do, which is trying to look at some biological connectivity of meadow habitats in Yosemite National Park. So it's not just about who knows who social interaction networks, but who eats who. Food webs, but it can also be spatial networks as well. And it's a tool that I found quite useful quite often in the work that I do. And a lot of the work especially that I used to do is looking at networks of ecological interaction. So what species interact with what other species, and I used Network 3D quite often to visualize those networks. But one of the basic problems is actually trying to compile the data for those networks in the first place. And it requires long hours of ecologists, often undergraduates, sitting out in the field, recording notes about what's happening with different species. But even then, it's almost impossible to get the spatial data that your eyes are constantly processing, registering, and then throwing away. The X, Y, Z coordinates of these species. And so here we've been working with a couple of the researchers in the computer vision group here in Cambridge, some of the guys who are actually principally behind the science behind Kinect, the computer vision algorithms behind the Kinect camera. And we've built a really general purpose tool for automatic object tracking in video. So this doesn't actually have to be for ecological systems. Could use it for pretty much anything, but really what we've done it for is to go towards a more autonomous monitoring of ecological interactions. And so here you can see the computer is picking up that these are two separate rabbits. They're hopping over each other. It's not perfect, so it's getting confused sometimes, but up here you can see this is a bee pollinating flower. This is a bunch of bees, actually an interesting experiment we're running with some plant scientists here at the university, trying to track pollination frequency and preferences of different bee species within a mesocosm. And then a last tool that I kind of want to talk about really quickly, I think that's the last one. Yep, is another tool. This is a integration of hardware and software, actually, and it's called SCOMER, after SCOMER Island, where the scientist Robin Freeman has done a lot of his work. And he's really interested in geospatial tracking of migrating seabirds. And so one of the problems with that is that current tracking technology is extremely expensive. Most of those tracking devices are quite heavy, sometimes too heavy to put on the birds that you want to track. And most of them often aren't open or reconfigurable. And they're often generally not, you can't communicate with them once they're on an animal that you're tracking. And so he's built, you can kind of see probably a fuzzy image here, a small, open, reconfigurable, flexible, wirelessly enabled, and low-cost tracking technology, and some software tools that go along with it to address common problems with tracking. And what's really exciting about this, again, is that you can throw these things on birds, which is great. That's what we're really interested in as well, but it's an extremely general solution to geospatial tracking problems in general. So you can think of fleets of automobiles that a large company is deploying, can drastically reduce costs on that end as well. And one of the things that's really cool about this technology is that it lets you take advantage of what I like to call ecological informants. So a big problem with putting geolocation trackers on species like lions or wolves, for example, they're often species that are difficult to catch, and you don't really want to have to catch them more than once. It often involves darting them and putting them to sleep and some highly invasive procedures. And so what's really nice about some of these SCOMER trackers is that they're an infectious. They have some infectious software built into them, in that any tracker on any individual can download data and programs from any other tracker. And so, for example, if you wanted to track a lion and you knew that it was often in frequent spatial proximity of some more common species like certain bird species or monkeys, etc., you can put these trackers on the lion, but you can also put them on monkeys and stuff like that, which are way easier to get your hands on again. And all you really have to do is get one of those trackers back, and it will have collected the location data from every other tracker. The other thing is, if you, for example, want to change the program, you want to say start collecting data at a different time interval or frequency, all you have to do is push that programmatic update out to one of those trackers, and you can let the social network of the animals out in the wild actually spread that programmatic update rather organically. And that's about it. I do apologize again for kind of the fact that I've just been droning on and none of you were able to interact with me, nor I able to interact with you. I guess what I would like to say is that if you're interested in any of these tools, you can definitely go to the website. You can definitely check out some of the more in-depth demoing videos that I've sent to the Research Connections crowd. And you can check out our group website, both the links that I'm showing there. And more importantly, I guess, if you're just want to know some information that you don't think you're going to find just skimming along, please do get in touch with me. My email is pretty simple, lujoppa@microsoft.com, and I can answer any questions, point you in the right direction, or let you know more about what we're up to, or potential collaborations or anything like that. And so into the future, that's fine. But also, if anybody has any questions for me right now, that's great as well.